In cooperation with the Friends of Hildene, Rutland Cablevision proudly invites you to spend the next few minutes with two of the most celebrated figures in American history. And now, from the flower garden of Robert Todd Lincoln's Hildene in Manchester, the 16th President and First Lady of the United States, Mr. and Mrs. Abraham Lincoln.
We're in the garden at Hildene, the home of Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of Abraham Lincoln. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, and his wife, First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln. Thank you.
Mr. President, tell us about your mother and your other mother.
Yes, you know, I had the unfortunate thing, Barbara. My mother died at 9 years old, and a year later my father remembered a woman back in Kentucky whom my mother and he had known before they were married. And she had lost her husband, so he went back there and proposed marriage to her and brought her home, and I was quite surprised because she had some things that I hadn't seen before.
What was that?
Bedding.
Oh.
I had a mattress. I was used to corn husks, but she had, and also she had some books. You see, my mother could only read those stories that children like. I think she had memorized those stories and could read them to us on Sunday, but
from the Bible, Mr.
From the
Lincoln.
Bible,
yes,
and that's all she could read. She'd had very little education, whereas my second mother, Sarah Bush Johnson, had had some more education, and she brought those books with us. So I was in for quite a change when she came.
Did she teach you to read?
No, she didn't. I was already in school and had begun to read.
Oh, I see.
And so by this time, I was 12 before I really could pick up a book and understand it. But I had learned to read in school from the Bible. In fact, it was the first book that I learned to read from. And of course, it was a constant companion. There weren't that many books out in the wilderness at that time because most of the mothers and fathers did not know how to read. My daddy could not read at all. Not at all. He could barely sign his name.
Not only that, but he really did not think it was important to go to school, and he had not encouraged them.
Many people didn't.
That's true, but it was his mother who had said it, that she wanted them to have the opportunity to schooling.
You were expected to become a farmer just like your father?
Yes. He said, I'm a good farmer and I'm a good carpenter. Why do they need to go to school? I can teach him all he needs to go there. But thank goodness, both mothers insisted that whenever there was a chance that we go to school. In fact, Sarah, that was quite a deal. You know, we had Sarah was my mother, and Sarah was my sister, and Sarah was my new sister.
Oh.
We had 3 Sarahs, but it was no problem. My mother was Mother, not Sarah. And of course, my sister was Big Sister, and the other one, Big Sarah, and the other one was just Sarah. So we had no problem with the name Sarah. But my new mother, right off the bat, realized that there was some potential because I've always wanted to read, and she would make the children go outside and play or play in another part of that little cabin we had. Another thing I'm so pleased with, we were used to a dirt floor, and when she came to live with us, the first thing she wanted, she said, Thomas, that's my father, she said, you're a carpenter, I want a floor in my cabin. So the first chance we had, we started cutting wood, and we had a floor in our cabin for the first time in my life. About 11 years old.
And all of this took place in what state?
This was all in Kentucky, Tom, except when my mother died. Now, we had moved over to, by this time, we had moved to Kentucky.
To Indiana.
To Indiana, and my mother had actually died in Indiana.
He often said that he was born in Kentucky, grew up in Indiana, and lived in Illinois. So his life was divided into 3 stages prior to going to the White House.
Now, Mr. President, as a young man, you weren't too interested in farming, were you?
No, Tom. My father taught me how to farm, but he didn't teach me how to love it. I thought there was other ways to do things, and you know, I took books into the field when I was plowing, and when it come time to rest the animals, I had a book either stuffed in my shirt or in my pocket, so I could take it out and read it while the animal was resting. So I was always reading when I could. even later when I became postmaster, I remember one time I borrowed a horse to deliver the mail, and I was up there reading, sitting along, and pretty soon out of the corner of my eye I noticed a strange house. We'd come to a fork in the road, and the horse took the wrong turn, and I ended up quite a ways out of the way for my delivery that day. But I was always reading whenever I could.
How old were you when you finally left the farm?
I was 21. Well, I really was 22. We moved from Indiana. I stayed with my folks there until I was 21, and we moved over to Illinois, and I helped the folks clear the farm and start their farm and build a cabin. And then I decided to go on my own. I was almost 22 at this time, and I went into this little town of New Salem, where I worked in the store and did various jobs and started studying law. Was encouraged there by those present to study, and I studied for 6 years and finally passed the bar examination. I also, in this town, bought a store with another man, and after a year that winked out. It failed, and I owed $1,300. And I resolved that we should pay that with this partner, but before we could get started paying it, my partner became sick and died. So I took on those old $1,100. And it was, even Mary helped me. It took me 11 years to pay those back, and Mary helped me even after we were married to pay off those debts, but we paid them off. I thought it was the only honest thing to do.
And by law, he could have taken bankruptcy. But that was not Mr. Lincoln's way of doing things.
How did you get involved with the Illinois militia?
Yes, they had a Black Hawk Indian War, and volunteers were called, and I felt very honored, probably one of the best honors I ever received. This group of men elected me captain of the outfit. I wasn't much of a soldier. I didn't know how to carry my gun, so they gave me a wooden one to carry many times to try to learn how to carry it. And also, when I was marching them one time, I had them two abreast marching, and we came to a gate. It was only wide enough for one man, and I couldn't think of the command to put them into single file. So finally I said, "Troops dismissed. We'll assemble on the other side of the gate."
And this quite in contrast, Tom, to the fact when he was eventually commander-in-chief and studied at night books of military tactics in order to better understand what his generals were going through in the strategy for the Civil War. He had such a brilliant mind, and he could apply himself to whatever he wanted to learn, and the diligence of that is what we try to, is what's so admirable.
Now, where did the Black Hawk War lead you to eventually?
Well, it led me to politics. Actually, I was a candidate for the Illinois legislature that year. My friends there in New Salem had encouraged me, Tom, and I was actually a candidate. The only thing wrong with it, I couldn't campaign. The Black Hawk War took me quite a ways up north, and we never did run into any Indians, thank goodness. The biggest thing we fought was mosquitoes, and so when I came back, there was no way to campaign. But out of the 300 votes in the little town of New Salem, I ended up with all but 7 of them. So I guess the people there in my village in New Salem liked me, and but I didn't win the election, and I went on studying, and I did serve a little later in the Illinois legislature from New Salem. In fact, I was from New Salem. I was instrumental in moving the capital with a group of other men to Springfield from Decatur, and served 4 years in the Illinois legislature, and then when they went into Springfield, finally became a lawyer, moved to Springfield. Why, this is when I became more interested in politics.
Were you ever connected with the Mississippi River in any way?
Oh yes, we'll back up a minute, won't we?
Yes,
I had an interesting situation there, Tom. I took a boatload of goods with a couple other fellows down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and this was my first real contact with slavery. After we'd sold all those things, I was wandering around the city looking the sights over, and I came upon the square, and they were selling slaves. And I told my friend at the time, "This is wrong. One man should not own another man." I said, "I cannot stand here and watch this. Let's go on." So we left, and as we left, I turned to this friend, and I said, if ever I am in a position to do something about slavery in this great country, I'm going to hit it hard. Now here I was with 19 years old and 1 year of education. I don't think I had too many aspirations of becoming president yet. But somehow I figured I would be mixed up in it somehow.
Years later, when you were in the White House, planning the strategy of the Civil War, I'm sure you remembered your days on the Mississippi River and how important it was to the country.
Yes, having gone down there, I realized the traffic on it and the movement of supplies and so forth, Tom. Yes, it was a very important waterway and means of transportation for supplies and so forth. So it was important that that be controlled by either the North or the South for the effort in order to win, yes.
Who do you consider your first real political opponent?
Oh, that's not hard at all, because I have to give him credit for really my political rise. Our debates back when we were running for the Senate, Stephen Douglas thought it was all right to have slavery everywhere, and I was willing to leave slavery like it was, but I didn't want it expanded, because later on I figured slavery could be abolished, but right now I definitely did not want it expanded because I knew it would be so much more difficult to stop it if it's all over the United States. And so he advocated his side and I advocated my side, and so I ran against him for the Senate in 1858. Needless to say, he won the Senate seat and went to Washington, and I went back to Springfield to practice my law. And actually it turned out to be a blessing for me. Those speeches, those 7 different speeches or debates that we had, made me well enough known that in the next 2 years I was asked to make about 16 more speeches, major speeches, in the eastern part of the United States. And my Cooper's Union speech was one that really brought me to the forefront. The people liked what I said there about slavery and so forth. And that was when it was determined by a group that I would be a very viable candidate for president. And so I owe this to Mr. Douglas. It's ironic, though, that when it came around to running for the president then in 1860, I was chosen as the Republican candidate, and Mr. Douglas was again chosen as the Democratic candidate for president this time. So we're at it again. And needless to say, you know who won this one.
Yeah. Tell us something about the different styles of campaigning.
Whoa, well, Mr. Douglas had quite a bit of money. I wasn't blessed with that. And he had a train, and he had bands, and he had buntings. Oh, it was a great thing to see him come into town. And sometimes I came walking, sometimes I came on a borrowed horse, and once in a while I even came on a freight car.
Was that in the presidential election?
No, this was for this was for the
Senate race.
No, the Senate race and the debates. Yes.
How about in the presidential?
For the presidential race, I did not campaign.
Oh,
no,
that's true.
I did not campaign. It was not the custom at that time to really get out and campaign. You went on your merits.
A president didn't, or a presidential candidate
didn't make that many. No.
The way they do now.
They put the articles in the paper and this way, but actually going out and making speeches for it, no.
There's one thing I'd like to mention here too. There was one time when he was running for one of these offices, and he had some expenses of the campaigning, but after it was over, he refunded $2.53 because he had not used that amount.
I think that was out of $100 too, hon.
I was not aware of the total, but I just know this showed that his complete honesty in all matters.
When you were elected president, the Union was starting to fall apart already.
Yes. The South had said that if I was elected president, they would begin to secede. And shortly after I had won the election, and even before I became president, yes, some of the states had already seceded from the Union. They thought that I was going to abolish slavery immediately. Well, I wrote letters and talked to different people and told them that I was more interested in the Union than I was in abolishing slavery right away. Besides that, it takes acts of Congress to do those things. It isn't me personally that could do it. And but they did not believe it. They thought my influence would be that slavery would be abolished immediately, Tom, and those that seceded, and then those immediately after I took office that March the 4th, seceded. And of course, you know, it was 5 weeks later that the shots were fired on Fort Sumter, which started the Civil War.
Of course, Mr. Douglas, who, by the way, was born in Vermont.
Yes, he was born in Vermont, so here we are. This interview is taking place in Vermont. The unfortunate thing, Mr. Douglas and I, you know, were friends. We just had a different philosophy about things. We had been lawyers together at various times, and we had courted Mary Todd. He was a suitor for her hand, and I think one time Mary was asked, which one are you going to marry? And she said, the one that's going to be president. And I won out and also won the presidency. Some years later, I won the presidency.
How did you feel when you arrived in Washington, as a person?
As a person?
Not as a president, but as a person.
Oh, well, I felt the awesome responsibility that was going to fall upon me. I did not have the cabinet that I felt, the supporting cabinet that I really needed at the time, Tom. I had many of those chosen for my cabinet were literally enemies of mine, but I had them in my cabinet because they were capable men, and not only that, I knew what they were doing. They were working for the government rather than against me. So there was method in my choosing my cabinet, and as far as, it was an awesome thing, really, to think that I did not have the real support that I was going to need, especially that was going to follow when the war really got started. I knew that the thing was going to be difficult and be time-consuming on my part. A very trying thing I knew was ahead for us.
What was ahead for your family?
Mary was going to have to be the head of the household most of the time. I could see that coming, where I was going to have to be working on the reins of government.
How did the children like Washington?
Oh, they didn't mind it. They didn't mind it, especially we were probably too lenient with our children, and many of my cabinet members were not very much excited when little Tad would come in and into a cabinet meeting and play under the desk, and he'd be running around, but we tolerated our children a lot
Mrs.
more.
Lincoln, did they have the run of the White House?
Yes, unfortunately they did. Washington at that time was a very unhealthy place to live, if you've not been aware of
Well,
the sanitation and the and the Potomac was quite a polluted river. It was an unhealthy place, and I was concerned about the health of the children.
Of course.
As you know, we did lose young Willie after we went to the White House, and this indicates too, Tom, for you to be aware of the fact that he took ill one night when we had a tremendous party going on there at the White House, a reception that we needed to be attending, and we had mixed loyalties about needing to be with our guests and yet wanting to be with our son.
Yes.
And several times during the evening, both of us went back into the room to check on him. But this is the sort of thing you see that you have to deal with, is meeting what the public expects of you and yet needing to be yourselves in your own private family life.
How did you feel about your personal goals when the war started?
Well, I had let it be known, Tom. In fact, I had my cabinet together, Tom, to offer. I said, why don't we pay the South to free their slaves and not have this thing? And my cabinet said, oh, it cost us too much money to do that. Besides that, we're using the taxpayers' money to pay for the slaves that belong to other citizens. Mm-hmm. And which, validly, it was a thought to be considered. But I could see where it was going to cost us so much more in lives and money in a war than it would there. I felt the burden of the country more than anything else, and I wanted this great country to stay together, to not be a divided country. So my complete thoughts were, even except for a few times when I would be thinking of my family, was concentrated entirely on the Union at that time, Tom, to make it a great country and to keep it that way.
You may not be aware, Tom, at the time when the Civil War started, the Capitol had not been completed. The dome was still not erected. And the government was considering just stopping it at that point and putting all the effort into the war cost, which was considerable, of course. But Mr. Lincoln encouraged me, said, no, let's complete the dome. It's a sense of accomplishment in going forward to let everyone know that we're not going to stop in the midst of it. A symbol, yes, a symbol to the nation of continuity and forward thinking. And so it was completed during the Civil War.
Did you make an offer to General Lee to serve?
Yes, you bet. When General Lee, when the war really started, I asked General Lee to be the commander of the Northern forces. And he said that he was from Virginia, and he felt a loyalty to Virginia, and Virginia has seceded from the Union, so he declined my offer and decided to lead the Southern Army. I think the war would have been much, much different, Tom, had Lee stayed and taken command of the Union forces, because two things. He was a strong general, and they would not have had him in the South. So the combination of all that on the North would have made a tremendous difference, I believe, in the whole outcome of the, not necessarily the outcome, but the time that the war went on. I think it would have been shortened tremendously had he taken command of the Union.
Oh, you had your share of troubles with the Northern generals.
Oh, yes, yes. The ones that I chose to go, a few of them were always preparing. In fact, I wrote one of them a letter sometime and told him that if he wasn't going to use the Army, I'd sure like to borrow it.
And what general would that been?
That was General Meade. Yes, he was.
Well, that wasn't, you know, we really need to study and be aware of the fact that many people who volunteered, and it was volunteers, had thought it would just be a short time.
Yeah.
They'd be away
Yeah.
fighting.
Like 3 months or 6 months.
So
That's
you
all
see,
they'd
it was
be
a
away from
matter
home.
of continually conscripting and continually training new people. So even though the generals might have, it took a long time to pull things together, and there was some reason for it, but yet not to the extent that they were not being, you know, forceful enough in their
Well,
command.
most of them were giving us the claim that the South had more troops than they had, and it was very definitely proven that it was wrong, that their assessment of it.
Yes, it's interesting to note, since we're in Vermont too, that this state, of all the northern states, provided more troops for the Union per capita than any other state at that time.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the Green Mountain Boys went down and fought.
Yes, yes,
Well,
sir.
Mason
Admirably.
Very, very admirably. Mm-hmm.
Of course, General Grant was criticized
Yes.
as a person, but he was a great general.
Yes, he was a tactician and a general, and he fought out west, and finally after going through 4 others that didn't do the job for me, why, I finally became aware of General Grant out there, and somebody says, well, he's a drunkard, and I said, well, if he's fighting like that, I'll send him some more, and he can win more battles for me. But I chose him to lead them and to lead the forces, and he was able to get the right people in the right places and to be inspiration enough that he went ahead and did.
You know, in that line, Tom, I'd like to tell you too that we as the Lincolns did not drink. In fact, at the time when Mr. Lincoln was notified that he was running for president, he had me go to the kitchen, Barbara, and bring out a toast. He said, this occasion calls for a toast. And then what did you tell our guests that day?
As they came back in, I said, gentlemen, this toast that we're drinking, I have never served anything stronger in my house, and I don't think just because I might become president I should change now. It is a toast of Adam's ale, fresh spring water.
And I can attest that we never did serve wine or any alcoholic beverage to our guests, nor did we use it ourselves.
When it came time to think about the Gettysburg Address, tell us what happened.
Well, the whole Gettysburg Address was, Gettysburg was the hardest fought battle during the Civil War, and they decided rather than send all these soldiers back to their various states, they would make a national cemetery at Gettysburg. So a group of men were appointed by the governor down there, and so they decided who was going to make the dedicatory message, and somebody said, well, the president. And one said, no, I don't think he's capable of giving that type of an address. Another one said, well, we can get Mr. Edward Everett. So they got him, one of the noted speakers in our country at that time, to do it. And then as we got closer to the dedication time, they thought, well, gee, we haven't even asked the president. He's so busy with the war, he probably won't come, but out of courtesy, we better ask him. So they asked me to come, and I accepted, and then they were they thought, well, quickly, well, maybe we do have Mr. Everett given the dedicatory, would you make a few appropriate remarks? So I did, and I made those. The Gettysburg Address was written on White House stationery in the White House. On the train to Gettysburg, I did make some changes. The night before in our friend's home there where I was staying, I made some changes. But the Gettysburg Address was written. It was not written on an envelope. It was thought out clearly. And after Mr. Everett had talked for 2 hours, mine only lasted for about 3 minutes. And I thought it was a failure because he had received a thunderous ovation. And when I was through, there was silence out there for a few seconds, quite a few, as a matter of fact. And so I thought my speech was a failure. Later I was to be told that that was the ultimate, that people were so taken with what I had to say that they were kind of spellbound for a while. Even Mr. Edward Everett came to me a day or two later and said, Mr. Lincoln, I wish I could have said in 2 hours what you said in 3 minutes. He said, your speech will be remembered.
Not only remembered, Tom, that it has gone down in history as the most eloquent piece of literature that we have in American
And spoken
government.
many, many times.
Many
Yes,
times.
yes.
Yes.
Mr. Lincoln had had the facility of the faculty of saying very eloquently in simple words what everyone could understand, but it was beautifully
Concise.
read.
And to the point.
And look at the one-syllable words that are in that Gettysburg Address. I wanted even any man, every man, to be able to understand what I was saying.
And almost every speech of his, too, always had a reference to God in it, because he himself was such, he lived so close to his belief in God.
Mr. President, can you tell us how you personally wanted to affect the world of 1860s and the future?
I think that the presidency is one of individual commitment and individual decisions that are made. And I think that my making those decisions under such difficult times, even though some of them were unpopular, even with my own cabinet, they were my decisions, and I think the strength that I used then is used by many of the presidents today, realizing that they are the man in the White House, and they will exercise their right to do the best they can in leading the country in the way that they feel is best. And I really think that each man that's in there, not beyond his political beliefs or affiliation, I think in any man that will apply those principles as president will be a leader in our country.
Do you not, to the extent that Mr. Lincoln has made an impact on America, there have been more books written about him than anyone except for Christ, over 10,000. There is one man today who has been given a commission to categorize make a list of all those books, and he said, I don't know that I want to take 8 years out of my life to do it.
This is both fiction and
Yes, anything
I'm sure.
dealing with Mr. Lincoln.
biography type.
It's any book that has been written about him.
And of course, while you were president, you had one book that you relied on a daily basis.
Oh, yes, my Bible. I had 2 of them, Tom, there in the White House, one at my bedside and one on my desk. And many, many times I was on my knees in my office prayerfully to God, because those the advice from those about me seemed so insufficient for the day that I went to God for the answers to the problems that were confronting this nation at that time.
And you probably would be interested in knowing, too, both of you, that the very last act that Mr. Lincoln was privileged to take care of in his administration was signing the bill for "In God We Trust" to be placed on our coinage. And because that represents so much what his life was like, and knowing that our great country was founded on that, that's a good way to remember Mr. Lincoln.
Yes.
Mr. Lincoln, Mrs. Lincoln, thank you very much for talking to us. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an enjoyable afternoon.
It's our privilege
Yes, thank you, both
to
of
be
you.
with you too. Thank you.
Thank you.